Welcome to Agile to Agility podcast with Miljan Bajic.
Major show alert!
The very first value we wrote is individuals and interactions.
Let's take this another level.
Because we didn't know how many of these guys we needed. Because we had Kent, we had Martin, and now we got Ron, who's there full time. And it turns out after a while, Kent and Martin would show up on the same week. And that was a wonderful experience to have both those guys working together on stuff.
Chet, when did you start coding and why? Because I think I want to know why you got down this path of programming.
I was in graduate school. I was in graduate school studying economics at the University of Cincinnati. And in order to do analysis of various things, I took a class in programming. I learned a variant of PL1, which is a language that IBM created many years ago. It's a kind of a combination of COBOL and Fortran, programming language 1, it was called. And so I took that class and really enjoyed it. And it was back in the old days when you had to punch cards. And of course, at a university, the card punches, the key punches, the ribbons were always worn out, so you could punch cards and you have no idea what you punched because you couldn't read across the top what it was. And so I discovered that I really enjoyed that, and I was in fact much better at it than I was economics, it turns out. And so I moved from being an economist, to being a programmer. And so I enjoyed that way much better. And I ended up going to a different school. I went back to where I got my undergraduate school and took all their programming courses, and then went into software development. And so and it turns out that the things I learned in economics are still incredibly useful. There's all kinds of interesting things you know how to do because of that background. It lets me to explain things in ways that maybe other folks can't. But I come at it from that. I had a problem that required programming, and therefore I learned to do that. And I discovered I was way better at it than the problem I was trying to solve.
Yeah.
So
what attracted? What did you really like? Do you remember like what really was it? The problem solving? Was it like what was it really that drove that got you hooked on?
It was the problem solving. That there's actually something that works and something that doesn't. And you compare that to economics, which is almost entirely theoretical. We would spend weeks doing mathematical proofs of some esoteric idea, and you discover somewhere in the middle of it that you had a sign wrong someplace, and the whole thing was crap. And only at the end where the answer you got didn't match up with what the answer is supposed to be in a university type setting. That you could figure out that we made a mistake somewhere, and you go back and found it. And so having something that actually sort of works in some way, and that has some degree of truth to it, was really compelling. And it made more sense. It made sense to me how you did those things. And I think that's kind of, as I've progressed through what I used to do in software, I hardly do anything anymore, but it's all about having a way of expressing what you want in a way that this machine can understand and comply with. So yeah, I think that's what drew me to it, was that. And of course, even there, you are always doing something that is fundamentally ephemeral. And so if you have a desire to actually create things and solve problems, software is fun to a certain degree, but every now and then you need to do something that's actually physical, whether it is cooking. I like to cook. We talked a moment ago before we went on the air about cooking. I cook because that is, I do something and I get a result. When you have feedback and it's meaningful, right? Now that I'm moving towards almost not as retired as some people we just talked about, but moving more towards working less, I've returned to woodworking. I used to build stuff when I was younger. Now I've gone back to building things. So the room over there is now a workshop, and I have been building cabinets and things. As we move to a new house, and I'm building cabinets and building furniture here and there. So my wife and I are doing that together, which is kind of fun. So,
That is, and especially with less traveling, everybody that I talk to, it's like
yeah.
they generally like they miss the part of traveling and talking, but they also enjoy the more time that they have at home, especially for those of us that have traveled a lot throughout the year. Um, what else have you reflecting back maybe just a little bit, but what else have you changed, and what does it really what does it say about you, in a sense, like you said, you like more practical stuff, you like to see results, and uh, uh, who's really Chet underneath, what else can you tell us about yourself that maybe others,
That's
what motivates you?
that's a hard question to anybody to have that kind of self, awareness. I often tell people that I run stateless, that I wake up every morning and it's a fresh universe and I just go off and do whatever I feel like doing.
Yeah.
To some degree that's true. But there are some things that are kind of woven through my life. Like I said, I like to cook, so I enjoy doing that, and I do all kinds of stuff like that. I've been building stuff. I have throughout my entire life been involved in something called trap shooting, which is shooting clay targets that fly out through the air,
Yeah.
and have been very, very successful at over the years at a competitive level, and was essentially the world champion at one point.
Oh, wow.
Back 30 years ago. But I'm going I'm going to the state championships tomorrow and compete. And so I do that. I've done various things in my life. Some of it's things I go back to, and others you try something and you say, well, maybe that isn't for me.
Anymore.
I took up flying probably 20 years ago, and because I always was fascinated by flying, and a family friend of ours when I was a child became a pilot, and I used to go fly with him. And took flying lessons, and discovered that I mostly scare myself. And it's like, well, I'm sure I could get good at this because it's not that hard. But there are times when I'm afraid of what I'm doing right here, and maybe that tells me I shouldn't be doing this. So while I love doing it, I decided that maybe that isn't what I should be doing.
Yeah. Maybe you can't so much take an empirical approach to flying, or maybe you can, but to some extent.
It's a lot like programming in that you do stuff and you have a pretty good idea what's going to happen, but it isn't necessarily what happens. And it's not about control, it's about influence. And the same, I don't know if you ever ski. Have you skied?
Yeah. I grew up in Sarajevo, so I don't.
So okay.
Remember.
Yeah. And so skiing, you have mostly influence over where you go, not exactly control, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And flying is a lot like that. It's a lot of skidding around in the sky as opposed to skidding around on the snow. My wife's a much better skier than I am, but I came to it late in life. If you grew up doing it, you'd be a whole lot better than I am. I didn't start it till I was in my 30s, and so.
Yeah, it was 1984 Olympics, Winter Olympics were held in Sarajevo. So everybody went crazy around. So what are some, maybe to switch gears a little bit, what are some basic ideas that are still true today that were true, decades ago when you were punching those cars and to do cobalt on mainframes? Like, what are key things that you think are still true?
I think the first principles, I think, are always the first principles, and I think it's the being able to take as small a step as you can reasonably take in order to learn something, and like all the stuff we do. Oscar, what are you meowing about? I have a cat back there meowing. That's Oscar. I don't know. I can't even see. It's what's the smallest step you can take to give you enough feedback to know whether you're on the right path or not. And I think the challenges that we have in XP and Scrum and any other, there he is, a real agile process is discovering what the smallest step we can take really is. as opposed to what the biggest step we can take is. And, and what in our history has always been, you find a small step and you do that, and you get bolder and bolder and bolder. You take bigger and bigger steps until all of a sudden you fall over. And it's like skiing where, okay, I'm done with the bunny hill and I go here and here and here, and you finally get, to the double black diamond, and you nearly heal yourself, and you go back to the greens. Right?
Exactly.
And that's the same kind of thing everywhere, is knowing when it's okay to take a little step and not kill yourself, and knowing that just because you did that thing and you didn't die, it doesn't mean it was a good idea. There's a difference between surviving and it having been a good idea. My buddy Ron always says, just because you jumped off the roof and survived, it doesn't mean it was a good idea. Right? And so exactly. learning what the good ideas are, working with people and understanding that we can solve more problems as a group than we can as individuals. And that the importance of having people who approach problems differently becomes incredibly important. And so one of the things I dislike about the world we're in right now, when I'm training from my basement. I don't know whether your room really looks like that or not, or whether that's just
no. It's just my fake background. It looks
fake background.
real.
Yeah, I don't even bother with the fake background. I'm in my basement. Luckily, I have windows at my basement, but I'm in my basement. You lose that sense of that little community you put together, for a couple day class, and you all come together to do something. And the fact that I am in some ways more experienced in the subject we're talking about doesn't mean that they don't have things they can teach me about what we're doing. And I think we lose that in this virtual world because we just don't have that interaction.
Do you think there's just a show? I am, but also I spoke yesterday. You probably haven't heard of him, Andy Singleton, from here. He's in Boston, and he's been doing remote teams for 20 years, right? And him and I were talking about just it's like it comes down to communication and collaboration, right? So 20 years ago, it was a lot harder, but like the technology is getting better and it's easier to communicate and collaborate. So it's probably hard to replicate in-person collaboration, building trust, but it's getting better, right? So there's some type of hybrid model or ways of working is going to emerge from this. And what's nice about it is now that people are more open to collaborate across the globe. Like it used to be like, oh, we need to fly people in. And yes, over the last 10 years, I think it started being more. But I think now what we'll see is, and the kids done, I used to teach up here in Maine, like undergraduate. And the way that even Scrum, when I teach Scrum in the undergraduate, the way kids think today is different than what we're used to. So for them, it's a lot easier. They're able to build relationships. So I think the future, in a sense, is going to be some hybrid between what we've experienced over the last year, mostly for most people, and the typical, in-person.
And my concern about some of that is that, of course, until you have experienced the one and working together in the same room, talking in a way that if you can hear somebody say something on the other side of the room that is important to you, you can hear it and communicate. Going back to flying, if you're flying along in the airplane, you have your headset on, listening to all the communication that's going on around you, you can tell when the controller is saying something to you, and you hear that, and you listen to it, and they can be talking to 10 other airplanes, and you just block that out. But when they talking to you, you hear it. And that kind of happens in a room where you have a bunch of folks sitting together, working together. in the way that XP started out, that you would hear something and you say, okay, I'll be over there. I know the answer to that. I'll come over there and
come on. Yeah.
help you with that. Whereas online, I don't know that you can get that same sort of communication happening. Maybe we can train ourselves to do that, but I'm concerned about scale. That if you have 20 people, a class of 20, 25 people, are you going to be able to read whether they're engaged in what you're doing just by scanning? We know that in Zoom, all of a sudden the pictures get smaller and smaller, and next thing you know, some of them aren't on the screen, and and even if I had a 60-inch monitor, I wouldn't be able to be engaged in the same way that you can be engaged with. It's the difference. I'll steal another line from Ron, which is the difference between a hug from your mother and a politely written note. A politely written note is okay, but it's not a hug. And so being in the classroom with people is that level of engagement. Whether we can hug or not, is that level of engagement. And I'm at a point in my life where if this is the way that's going to be, I might be ready to go do something else for a while. I'm old enough and I've done things successfully enough that I could quit. And it might, and so quitting is and only doing the things I want to do, as opposed to the things I'm doing today just to generate, the business is different. So we'll see where I am a year from now.
Yeah, and I think it's we're all speculating and guessing, and I think, but there is something about younger generations that I'm seeing that it's I was teaching class a little while ago, and all of a sudden on Mural, people start taking notes as I'm talking. Like they're adding, people are commenting, like with stickies and putting things on the mural that I use, and they're like, I was like, what's going on here? I didn't tell them, they and they're like, yeah, we do this at school too. Like, we just, they have chat, they have comments, and they're adding. And then, and I was like, I used to pay people to give me notes in college. And this is like another way of just how kids are so used to now collaborating and communicating in different ways than maybe what we're used to.
And I think we see that as kind of a generational thing. I had a class a few weeks ago where I had sent people off into breakout rooms and into Miro to do something. And after, I don't know, 10 minutes or something, I closed the breakout rooms and brought them back and discovered that one of the groups had not done anything. And they said, well, you never came in and told us to start. So now I tell people, start. When you get in there, start. Don't wait for me to come. So I get to tell them this story and they all get to laugh, and it's like, no, start. You're allowed to start.
It is, and I think everybody's learning.
Yeah.
I want to take us back to 96 when you joined.
1996. I can't go back to 1896. That was before my time.
1996 to Chrysler's CT project. I want to know how did you end up on that project?
Well, it started before that.
Yeah.
The payroll department, which is what C3 was a payroll system, had been struggling to replace their old COBOL unit record system for a while, several years. And the guy who was in charge of this, a guy named Tom Hadfield, had been working with the payroll folks and done various things. And somewhere along the line, they had actually purchased a package, an off-the-shelf system that was sold by the neighbor of one of the senior managers in the IT department. And so they bought this. He wasn't, he was like in a whole completely different area, but he was the, when you've been around big companies, you know how those things work.
I know.
So they struggled for a couple years, probably trying to figure out how to install this system that didn't work any way that the payroll people wanted to work. And so they had to mangle this thing, and it finally gave up. And they did, I think, a couple other things. And so it was finally decided that the company was going to write something from scratch. And this was kind of 1993, 1994. And the whole ideas of OO were just coming into bloom.
Mm-hmm.
And so they started out by wanting to model and design, kind of the traditional kind of approach. And we had a fellow, there was a fellow over in Ann Arbor, Michigan, so not too terribly far away, named Jim Odell. And Jim Odell had created a modeling language, and he would partner with a guy named James Martin, who was big in kind of the previous world. So he hooked up with James Martin, and they'd created the Martin Odell modeling language. This is before UML and all those things. There was a proliferation of modeling languages. And so somehow Tom got a hold of Jim Odell, and Jim Odell started showing up, and they started modeling things and doing interesting stuff. And after a little while, Jim said, I'm kind of busy, but I have this friend, I have a colleague that I've hooked up with over in the UK, and you should have him come over and help you. He's a young guy, he's really smart. It's okay. And so this guy named Martin Fowler started showing up, commuting from London over to Detroit and spending a week over here at this group. And they fussed around, doing all this stuff, drawing pictures. And they brought in a consultant who helped them learn small talk, because back then you either did C++ or you did small talk. And small talk was a whole lot better world than C++. And so they started doing small talk. And they put together a little team who were doing this modeling, and they were actually writing little bits and pieces of small talk code to learn how to do stuff and to solve little problems that the payroll folks had. So they actually deployed some tiny little applications that help people do things. They're written in Visual Works small talk. And so it got to be the point where we needed to add more people to this team. And I knew Tom. I'd met Tom like the second week at Chrysler. Because it turns out that I needed to talk to Tom because I was doing something. I'd always worked in benefit systems, personnel kind of systems, and retirement and workers' compensation and all those kinds of things. And one of the things we needed to do was access payroll data. And I needed to get to this payroll data. And in order to know how to use it, I needed to test. And it turns out that they had some test databases that were like 5 years old. And so I went to Tom and said, do you have any way of me making new test databases? And he was just amazed that somebody wanted to test, I think. And so I impressed Tom like my second week there, because I was figuring out how to build databases so I could test stuff, and nobody had ever asked for this, And so I rebuilt the test systems that the payroll system had, even though I wasn't in payroll, and on and on. And so by the time this came around, I had been hired. I was a contract program to start with, and I had been hired, and now I was in charge of a small team there. And me and a couple of my buddies knew Tom and knew they were starting this payroll thing. And so I got put onto it. I said, I want to work on this payroll. And my current boss thought that was odd and interesting, and said, you really want to go over there, stop being a team leader, stop being moving your way towards being a manager, and go over here and be a programmer on this payroll thing. And I said, yeah, because I think it seems like fun. I think they're going to do something interesting, and I think I can help them, because I think I know how to do things and be successful, and I think I can probably help them. And so this all started happening, and this was 95-ish. And we hired some consulting company to come in and help us. And they brought in half a dozen or a dozen people. And we worked building this payroll system for about a year, a little over a year. And Martin was still coming over and looking at what we were doing, and he was very, very concerned. And the interesting thing is that the consultant guys wouldn't talk to him.
Why?
They were afraid of him.
Uh,
They were afraid of him. Now he wasn't anybody then. He was just this, young guy from the UK, moved to the US. But when Martin would show up, they wouldn't have any meeting. They wouldn't talk to him. They wouldn't show him what they were doing, nothing. Because they were afraid of having anybody look at what he was doing that might know more than they did.
yeah.
And so finally, all this relationship kind of soured, and we got to like 14 months into this project, and we had something that was sort of working after 14 months, but it was very, very slow and only sort of worked. and a few of us thought that if we could get it to go faster, we could probably figure out the deficiencies. And on the internet as it existed back in 1995, 1996, there were a group of what were called listservs. Remember listservs around programming called CompLang, and then the name of the language. And so there's CompLang Smalltalk, where people communicated about Smalltalk stuff. And so I read this. I looked at it every day or two. And there was somebody asked a question to the CompLang Smalltalk group, saying, I'm going out to all these languages and I'm asking people to write a program in each one of those languages to generate the lyrics to the song 99 Bottles of Beer on the Wall. If you remember the song 99 Bottles of Beer on the Wall, take one down, pass it around, 98 bottles of beer on the wall, right? So generate that. And it goes all the way down to no more bottles of beer on the wall. And so people had written these little programs that were not particularly very interesting. They were just mostly basically just a display of the lyrics. But somebody had written this beautiful program that had a chorus object and a lyrics object, and you sent sing to it and all this stuff, and you had tests going in at work, and he had results of a performance tool showing where it was spending time and how to performance tune this program to generate the lyrics to 99 Bottles of Beer on the Wall. And so I went into work and I said, I printed out this thing and I said, here, look at this. This is the guy we should have for come in and help us. We should bring this guy in. And so we all looked at this and said, yeah, we ought to get this guy. And so one of us contacted this guy, Kent Beck, and he showed up and he looked at our stuff and we fooled around a little bit and started teaching us how to do unit testing. And we discovered all kinds of really awful stuff that these consultants, the worst, the guy who was the architect for this system had written some code that was completely wrong. That they had built a system that was based on timestamps. And if you did things and you updated stuff based on the timestamp when something was done, that was an interesting architecture. But he decided that the timestamp class in Smalltalk wasn't what it ought to be. And he wrote his own. And it turned out it had a bug in it that the milliseconds had to run through twice before the second would increase once. And so you would have a situation where time did not run linearly. It would go back. Right, it was looping.
Exactly.
And so we ran a first unit test we wrote was just calling time now and seeing that it was always greater than the last one, and the test failed. It's first unit test we wrote. And so this caused these people to basically all quit and leave. And so we were just kind of left by ourselves. And sitting around, Kent and another, a member of our team, a guy named Don Wells, decided that the right solution was to just start again. And so Kent went and talked to the CIO of Chrysler and said, we should start again. Just throw everything away and start again. It was a good learning thing, we did a good learning exercise. It's time to now start for real.
What was your first impression of Ken? I mean, that's pretty ballsy to go up and talk to.
He's such an engaging person. He's such an engaging person that he just sucks you in no matter what. And so we'd have done anything. He said, I think. And I still would. so he went, and our customer, our business partner, Marie, had gone on vacation. She was in Florida. It was the week of week of Valentine's Day in February. And so one of us called up Marie and said, we decided to throw it away and start again while she was on vacation. And she said, I'm never going on vacation again. And so she came back from vacation, and he set us all down and told us this process he'd made up, that he and Ward Cunningham had made up, and we didn't have a name for it then. It's just how we were going to work. And he said, okay, we're going to do these things called user stories. So you what's a user story? He said, a user story. That's a good question. What's a user story? User story is imagine we've written this program, and it's the best possible payroll you could ever imagine. And we ship it, the payroll folks are using it. It's in production, it's being used. And after they've been using it a little while, we go talk to them. And they tell us all the wonderful things this new payroll system they can do with it, how great it is, and all the things they can do, and all the problems it solves, and all this stuff. And he said, imagine we would write those things down, all these stories they tell us about the payroll system, write those down, and go get in our time machine and go back in time and build that. That's what a user story is supposed to be. The story your user would tell about what your product does for them. Mm-hmm. None of this as I once sold that garbage. What the story your user would tell about your product. Now, there's one problem with that, of course, which is there's no time machine. But you had to kind of overcome that. So it's imagine what this product would be like.
And it's also like understanding, it goes back to empathizing with the users and understanding like what's going on and what problems they're dealing with and looking through their eyes, right? Rather than typically you would look as a developer from a systems perspective and through own eyes. So.
Yes, and so it's like putting yourselves in the hands of that. And of course, as a practical matter, what we did was Marie had written a big, huge requirements document sometime over this period. And so we got some 5x8 index cards, and we gave her some glue and a pair of scissors, and we had her cut it up and glue portions of this requirements document on cards. And so that's how we did it to start with, was she cut up the requirements document and glued it onto cards. Then after a while, she started writing things, and and we just kind of went down the path of talking about stuff, and she'd write stuff down, and that's and of course we kept them in a lunchbox. We stored the backlog in a lunchbox. So
that is awesome. And I don't know, it's interesting because I don't think I've heard that. So I'm sure you've told it before, but I think it'll be interesting. Where does Ron come into this? When did you meet Ron?
Well, Kent was only going to come by like a week every month, and Martin was doing the same sort of thing. We decided we need to have Martin because he saw what was going on before. He was the guy who told us that these other folks are off the rails. We probably still need to have somebody who's a second check. So we brought Martin in, kept Martin. And Kent said he needed somebody there full time. Yeah. And so he reached out, and his buddy he used to work with, Ward Cunningham. You familiar with him? There's somebody you should invite to come on, is Ward Cunningham. And
I have him on my list, so
okay.
I want,
So he called up Ward and said, "Do you know anybody in Detroit?" And Ward said, "I think I do." And he called up because years ago, a few years before, Ron had been working with a little startup company. He's based in Ann Arbor, or just outside Ann Arbor, and they were doing this little startup to build this little program, and they had brought in Ward to help them. And so he said, "I know Ron Jeffries, who's in Ann Arbor." And so he gave Kent Ron's phone number, and he called up Ron and said, "Are you near Detroit? Are you in Detroit?" He said, "Well, I'm in Ann Arbor. I'm close enough." Okay. And so he said, "Okay, go over and talk to these guys." And so he came over and talked to us, and we weren't. I think we sent him home the first time. It's like we don't know why we needed him. But he came back a second time, and we kept him, and so he stayed with us. So he was our on-site person, and we would not have been anywhere near as successful as we would have been without him. So it was a good decision is to bring him in. Although the first time we were not too sure about him because we didn't know how many of these guys we needed, because we had Kent, we had Martin, and now we got Ron, who's there full time. And it turns out after a while, Kent and Martin would show up on the same week. And that was a wonderful experience to have both those guys working together on stuff, writing code with both of them, looking at things and doing things with both of them. And then Ron coming in, and Ron there all the time and helping. Ron wrote almost no code. He wrote almost no code, but he influenced everything we did. In the file analysis, there might be more code in that system that Kent wrote when he was there every a week a month, as opposed to Ron, because he was like, I'm not going to write the code, I'm going to help you figure out what the right thing to do. And so he taught me amazing things that I would not have learned otherwise about how to solve problems in ways that I had no idea you could solve that way. So,
true coach, huh?
a true coach. Not getting on the field, but helping people, do things better than they would have otherwise. So yeah, absolutely. All of them are like that. Working with those three guys was just an amazing experience.
What are some of the memories, like maybe with each one of those, like if you reflect back, since you first met him, well, like what are the things that stand out? What are the things that you remember?
Well, of course, with Ron, it happens every day, and so there's interesting things. I just said something about stuff he taught me how to do. He had worked with some really odd guy. Odd is probably the right word, over in Ann Arbor, who had a belief, and I think probably correct, that the basic mathematical underpinnings of relational databases is wrong, and he had a different set of math. And so Ron, at one point, had actually built database system based on this alternate form of math. And so there are times when we were dealing with large pieces of data that he would just bring out just a little bit of those ideas about how you deal with that, to be able to process huge amounts of data in ways that I had no idea you could do it that way. And so in things that most systems don't approach. And so we had a situation where we needed to take a huge chunk of data and rearrange it and put it in a different order. And my solution was to file transfer it back up to the mainframe and run it through a sort program, and then bring it back down. And so I started doing that. And Ron said, "Oh, no, we don't have to. We just do this." And we wrote just a little bit of small talk, about that much, and it did the thing we wanted to do in less time than it took the file to transfer to the mainframe. And we'd had the problem solved by the time my file transfer finished. And so taught me how to do those kinds of things, with playing with indexing, creating your own indexes and manipulating them, and then rewriting the file based on what your index was, using using a pointer to go through the file and pull out the data you want. Martin, I don't know. Martin's just a fun guy to do everything, all kinds of stuff with. So he's just such a wonderful guy. And I actually went off and worked with him a little bit after he got a real job. And so, all the stuff we do with Martin was always fun. We actually worked together to create the first acceptance testing framework we used. We wrote it together. Actually, I wrote part of it and decided it was no good, and we threw it away and did something else. But he was very influential in how we did that. Kent, well, I had a lot of fun with Kent. We had to move data from our servers to the mainframe, and of course they use different languages. The servers down here using ASCII, and the mainframe uses something called EBCDIC, which is a different encoding of characters. And so we had to actually create an EBCDIC file in our Smalltalk system to be able to send it to the mainframe, because the things that would automatically do the translation don't actually work on all the things you need to work on. And so there was one day when Kent and I wrote a translator from ASCII to EBCDIC. And I had my old IBM green card, is called, even though it's yellow, that shows what the binary is and what characters it represents. And we used those two things, and we actually wrote that translator together. And so that was fun, because it was stuff that Kid had never done anything like that before. That
Yeah, I mean,
was foreign to him, and so I was kind of the expert on this stuff, and he was, so we did that together, and that was fun to do. So we had one of the rules of extreme programming is now called sustainable pace,
Mm-hmm.
and it started out as no overtime. No overtime.
Yeah.
And we had a special meaning of overtime, which is having to be at the office when you really just don't want to be. And there were days in working on that project, working on that team, where I wanted to go into work on Sunday. And if my wife hadn't stopped me, I would have gone to work on Sunday, and it would not have been overtime. Because we had so much fun doing that it was not overtime. It was fun every time we did stuff, and we had times when we had a little conflict here and there and all the stuff that happens, but we were a good team, and we learned how to work with each other. We had created our own culture. And
how big was this team? Like, how many people are we talking about?
Counting Marie, and sometimes she had 2 or 3 assistants working with her, we were probably max about 15 or 16. So probably 12 developers, more or less.
Yeah.
So a nice team, not kind of on the hairy edge of how big you ought to be.
Exactly.
But still, of course, we did everything in pairs, and so that kind of made your size logically a little bit different. But yeah, that's as big as it was, and we completed our product, our system in 11 3-week sprints, so 33 weeks.
Wow.
Which we came up with, and we hit the date because it was our date, and we hit it. And replacing something that took 14 months and didn't work. So we did it in less time with fewer people, and worked way better.
Yeah.
Eventually they replaced what we did, but with an off-the-shelf solution. They bought something from PeopleSoft, and it took 2 years to implement, and 3 times as much money with a team 3 times as big.
Yeah. And that's probably still true today. Like, when you look at it, and maybe to shift gears a little bit, I'm interested. There are 17 authors of the Agile Manifesto.
I hate every one.
I've signed independent online, and you're the first on that list. What insights did you have? How did you get to sign it online?
It was well, I'd left Chrysler, and I'd gone to work with Martin at ThoughtWorks. I spent about a year at ThoughtWorks with Martin. And I was talking to Martin. He said, I'm going to this thing that Alistair's having. Alistair's doing this thing out in Utah. And, and a bunch of us are getting together, and we're going to talk about some stuff. So, okay, that's interesting. So maybe I should go. So I called up Alistair, and I said, I understand you're doing something. Yeah. Blah, blah, blah. We talked about it, and so who's all coming? He told me who's coming. And it's like, well, that's kind of interesting. But, you got Kent, and you got Ward, and you got Ron, and you got Martin, and you got, 2 or 3 other XP guys, and it sounds like it's interesting, but it doesn't really feel like I need to be there.
Yeah.
It doesn't really feel like I need to be there. And so we decided that I probably didn't need to be there, which was a bad mistake on my part, because there should have been 18 authors of the Agile Manifesto, including me. It would increase my consulting rate and nothing else. And so I didn't go. And so Martin came back and said, "Oh, we wrote this thing. So show it to me." Okay, blah blah blah. And Ward is putting up this website. He's going to publish it. Okay, and you can go out, and you can sign it on the website. Okay, so I'm the first person who signed it, because I'm the first person who knew about it.
Yeah,
because nobody knew. This was before anybody had heard of the Agile Manifesto. It was Martin came back, on Monday. He told me that we did this thing, and you can go out here to this website that Ward built, and you can sign it. So that's why I'm the first signatory, is because I'm the first person to have heard about it, because I didn't go. But I should have gone. I just,
Yeah. You wouldn't have. It would be great, I think, if you did. But going back to diversity,
Yeah, would more white guy have helped?
yeah,
Yeah,
um,
would one more white consultant have helped?
yeah, exactly.
Probably not. Probably not.
But given that, I didn't know the context, but yeah, given that, everybody there, like you really should have been. But
Yeah. A lot of people think I did. Well, so I can skate on that sometimes. You can sometimes get a drink in a bar based on being me, and so some people believe I was. So I'm close enough that I'm okay.
yeah. We got a little bit of time here left. I have a couple of questions, but I'm interested from your perspective. What should I have asked you that I didn't know enough to ask? Like, what is something that you would ask? Well, the question that I asked Ron, as I told you before we started, I reached out to Ron to say, "Hey, give me some things on chat."
I'd have given you questions for Ron. It's hard to know. I mean, I can talk about.
Yeah.
I feel like I can talk about almost about anything. There's challenges in every space we go.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that bringing more and newer ideas in are probably helpful. And if nothing else, the question you should be asking the old, graybacks like me isn't, what insights we have about what's happening and what might happen in the future. The best question might be, who should I talk to? Who should I be talking to get new and better ideas from the world?
So who should I be talking to? Who do you currently respect and think that we should be talking to, and maybe bringing some more spotlight on?
There are some really interesting non-old white men out there. Jessica Kerr, Jessitron, as she's known, is incredibly interesting. And if you don't know her and don't know the stuff she's been talking about for the past few years, you really ought to talk to her. She did a keynote address at one of the Agile Alliance's technical conferences a couple of years ago, talking about the beginnings of opera and how that was actually something that was intentionally done, that there was actually a group of folks who did not think music was moving in the direction they wanted it to move, that there needed to be a new idea. And they got together and came up with what opera is. And there's actually a term for this community is called a camaraderie. I can't pronounce it. The word will form in my mind in a moment. A camerata, I believe is the term, which is this little intentional group of folks who come together for a reason and work together. And to the extent that the folks who were the birth of XP and Scrum and Agile were little groups of this camerata kind of things happening. And so talking to her about those ideas, plus whatever else she thinks is interesting right now, incredibly useful. There's another wonderful person, Kat Swettel, out in Arizona, I think Kat is, who's one of those people that if somebody says, who should I invite on my podcast? I say, talk to Kat, because she's brilliant, and that's somebody needs to have more spotlight on her.
Great.
And so I talk to those two folks, and tell them, that the old white guys have suggested we talk to you, because they know that we need more than old white guys in order to prosper. And so that's I think that's probably the most interesting question you could ask, which is, who should I talk to that isn't an old white guy? And it's Jessica and Kat, I think, are the folks you ought to talk to.
Great. That's a really good way to look at it. And and to really, and one of the reasons that I didn't ask that is like, hey, how disconnected are these people, Chad or whoever, right? And sometimes I'm making my own assumptions, and you just you made me think about something that I haven't thought about, and just
Yeah.
so maybe as a last question, I want to just maybe focus on Scrum a little bit. A lot of developers don't like Scrum, and for various reasons.
Yes. They
And
mostly don't like what we call dark Scrum.
yeah. And how do we help developers? I know you and Ron have talked about, like, when it comes to investing in developers, training developers, you created the Scrum Alliance, the first CSD program. It's being revamped right now, but in general, compared to there are a lot more developers, as you've talked about it, as Ron has talked about it. But what can we do to help developers?
I think unless we put ourselves in their shoes and understand how Scrum has impacted them, and not Scrum as described in the Scrum Guide or necessarily taught by trainers, but
Mhm.
what actually happens on the ground. I think one of the manifestations, perhaps the most significant manifestation of this thing that Ron and I call dark Scrum, is the daily Scrum, the daily stand-up, as most folks call it. We were forced to stand up for 15 minutes for some odd reason. I always like to say that, that's called the daily Scrum. We don't care what physical posture you take on. You can stand, you can sit, you can lie on the floor, you can hang from the ceiling. We don't care. But saying, that we do care, that you have to stand for these 15 minutes, that's kind of silly, isn't it? And that it's a serial interrogation where you have to stand there and confess what you did yesterday and what you're going to do today and what you need help with.
To justify that you're busy, yeah.
Justify that you're busy, and when I became a programmer, maybe once a week I had to tell my boss what I'd been doing, but I sure didn't have to tell him every day.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not after the first week. I didn't have to tell him every day what I was doing. That once we understood that we were on the same page with what we're trying to accomplish here. But think about what happens is we tell you that here's this thing that you have to build something in these little slices of just a few weeks at a time, without giving them any insight in how to do that, because they've been taught in their training in university or wherever how they learn to program to work in a particular kind of way. And they've worked in that particular way their whole life, where you went off and you did analysis and you did design and you built this thing and you and on the very end you're supposed to have something that worked. Now, the fact that never actually happened didn't matter to us very much. And now we're saying do this completely different thing, and we've not taught them how to do it. And that was what the original CSD, because it was based on the XP immersion courses, which is teaching people how to do that. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that happened in the original XP immersion, that happened in Ron and my 5-day developer course, everybody in that class, every little team we put together in that class failed at one point or another. They had a sprint, we had a 90-minute sprint, they had a 90-minute sprint where they didn't get anything done. And the important thing in a 5-day class is you had time to do that. And the most important thing is the discover how to survive,
actually.
get back on track from that, how to recover from that. Mm-hmm. And in a 3-day class, in a 2-day class, in a 3-day class, you really can't do that. Even if it's a 2-day programming class, you might get to the fail part, but you won't get to the recover part. And it turns out that programming is way more failure than anything else. And that's the thing nobody is taught how to do, is recover from failure. You read a programming book, and the guy writing the book has apparently never made a mistake, because there's no mistakes in the book. Right?
Yeah.
And if you go off and you read any of Ron Jeffries' articles about programming, you'll see how frequently a real programmer, a world-class programmer, makes a mistake, because he tells you what he did wrong and he tells you how he got out of it.